My cousin had been sleeping with my fiancée for 7 months. The worst part, the part that still sits heavy when I let myself think about it, is that when I found out, my own mother looked me in the eye and told me I was overreacting. That blood matters more than broken promises. That I should find a way to forgive and move forward. So I did move forward. Just not the way any of them expected. I'm a forensic accountant at one of the big 4 firms in downtown Toronto. See, I spend my days building cases out of spreadsheets and bank statements, looking for the number that doesn't fit, the transaction that contradicts the story someone's trying to tell. It's slow, methodical work. You have to stay patient when everything in you wants to draw a conclusion early. You have to follow the paper trail wherever it leads, even when you don't like where it's going. I was 33 that spring. My fiancée and I had been together for 4 years, engaged for 14 months. The wedding was booked for the following October, at a venue in the Distillery District, an old heritage building with exposed brick walls and long wooden banquet tables she'd loved. The moment we'd walked through the door during our first tour. The deposit alone was $800. Between the venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist, and her dress, I was just over $22,000. Deep into a future I believed in completely. My cousin moved in with us in November. He'd been laid off from a tech startup in Waterloo. Something about the company losing a round of Series B funding and cutting the sales team. His version always centered on a vindictive VP and a performance review that wasn't conducted fairly. I didn't push on the details. He was family. We had the second bedroom in our condo on King West. I told him to take whatever time he needed to get back on his feet, no pressure on a timeline. My aunt called me twice, in the days before he moved in, to tell me what a good person I was. My mother said the same thing. Family helping family, she said that's how it's supposed to work. 7 months later I came home early. I'd been running a fraud engagement for a financial services client since January. Layered, complex. The kind of file where one suspicious wire transfer unravels into 40. That Tuesday in June, our team located the audit evidence we'd been chasing for 6 weeks buried in a decommissioned SharePoint folder. By 1:30 in the afternoon, the engagement was effectively wrapped. My manager told me to take the rest of the day. I stopped at a French bakery on Queen Street on my way home. My fiancée had mentioned their lavender macarons twice in the past month. The way she mentioned things she wanted without quite asking for them, slowing down when we walked past, commenting on the window display. I stood in line for 12 minutes. Paid $11 for a box of 6 and didn't think twice about it. My cousin's car was in visitor parking when I pulled in. Normal, he worked from home on freelance contracts and spent most afternoons on the couch with his laptop. I took the elevator up, balanced the bakery box, unlocked the door. The condo was quiet, too quiet for 2 people being home. His jacket was on the hook, her purse was on the kitchen island where she always left it. No typing sounds, no television, no voices. Then I heard it from the bedroom. That particular rhythm. The kind you don't mistake for anything else. I set the macarons on the kitchen counter, gently. I don't know why that detail stays with me, but it does. I walked down the hallway. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. They hadn't bothered to close it. Why would they? I wasn't supposed to be home for another 4 hours. I pushed it open. My cousin scrambled backward. So fast he nearly fell off the bed. My fiancée grabbed the duvet. They both looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quilt, more like Fiancée people make when a fire alarm goes off. And they're still deciding whether it's real. How long? My voice came out flat, professional. The voice I use when I start a client interview. They looked at each other. A half-second of eye contact that had its own grammar, its own shorthand. That's when I understood this wasn't new. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was routine. How long? My fiancée started crying. 7 months. Since November. 7 months. Since the week he moved in. Since the week I handed him a key and told him to make himself at home. Because that's what family does. I did the math the way I always do. 7 months of condo fees and mortgage payments, on a unit they were treating as their personal arrangement. While I was at the office. 7 months of groceries I'd bought for all 3 of us. 7 months of wedding, planning, the venue tours, the cake tasting at the place on Ossington that required a booking, the save the dates I'd addressed by hand because she'd wanted them to feel personal. I turned around and walked out of the bedroom. Down the hallway, past the kitchen, past the macarons, out the front door. I took the elevator down and sat in my car, in the visitor parking for nearly 2 hours. Phone on silent, doing what I've trained myself to do when a file goes bad. I stopped feeling and started planning. First, the accounts. We had 2 joint accounts, checking and a savings account we'd been building together for wedding expenses. Total balance, $31,420. My contributions were documented to the cent through payroll deposits and trace transfers. I moved my share to my personal RBC account. Not a dollar more. I'm not a thief. I just know how to protect what's mine. Then I screenshotted everything. Transaction history going back to November, e-transfers, credit card statements, every grocery run, every dinner out, every utility payment. I organized it chronologically, the way I organize everything. I called my real estate agent from the parking garage. Told her I needed to list the condo as soon as possible. She asked if everything was okay. I said it would be, and asked about the current market on King West. That night I booked a room at a hotel near the airport. Drove there without telling anyone where I was going. And started working through the logistics of my life coming apart. The family meeting happened on Sunday. My aunt called. She'd gotten a number for me through my sister, since I'd already blocked the obvious contacts. Sunday at 2 o'clock, she said. At my mother's place in Etobicoke. We need to sit down and sort this out like adults. I should have said no. But some part of me still thought there was a version of this. Where I walked in and my mother had his bags ready at the door. Where she didn't tell him what he'd done and make it clear whose side she was on. The living room had been arranged like a tribunal. My mother in her chair by the window. My aunt on the love seat, with her arms crossed. My cousin and my fiancée on the couch, shoulders touching, looking like they'd rehearsed their expressions. The only open seat was a dining chair, someone had pulled in from the kitchen, and positioned directly across from all of them. I stood in the doorway. "Sit down," my mother said. The voice she used when I was a teenager, and she'd already made up her mind. "I'll stand. Why is she here?" "Because this involves her," my aunt said. "Troy genuinely cares for her. That doesn't make what happened right. But it's real, and we can't pretend otherwise. We need to deal with this as a family." My fiancée was already crying. She was very good at crying. I noticed that clearly, watching her from across the room. "I'm so sorry," she said. "We fought against it for so long. We really did. But sometimes you can't stop what you feel." My cousin sat forward, jaw tight, with the look of a man who'd convinced himself. He was a good person who'd made a complicated mistake. Which is a very different thing from actually being sorry. "I know what I did," he said. "And I hate that you're in this position. But what Natalie and I have is real. Neither of us planned for this to happen." "For 7 months," I said. "Feelings don't have an off switch." My mother stood and put her hand on my arm. She had that gentle, patient expression I recognized from 100 arguments I hadn't won. "I know how much this hurts. Anyone would be devastated. But he is your family. He made a mistake. A serious one. But people make mistakes. And if her feelings changed, isn't it better to know now, before the wedding? Before you both made a commitment you couldn't honor?" I looked at my mother. The woman I'd been calling every Sunday for 8 years without fail. The woman I'd lent money to, after her car loan fell through during the divorce, because her credit had taken a hit, and she'd needed someone to co-sign. The woman who'd told me I was her rock. Her reliable one. The one who always showed up. "You're taking their side." "There aren't sides. We're all family here." "You're taking their side." My aunt leaned forward. "He's been suffering too. Both of them have. This has been eating them alive. They were planning to tell you themselves after the wedding." I repeated it out loud. Because I needed to hear how it sounded in a room full of people. After the wedding. My fiancée had the decency to look at the floor for a moment. Then the tearful routine shifted, a slight recalibration, a change in strategy. "You work constantly," she said. "You've been checked out for months. Maybe if you'd been more present in this relationship, things wouldn't have gotten to this point." There it was, my fault, a different angle but the same destination. I looked around the room one more time. My mother, who'd chosen her nephew over her son. My aunt, who'd organized this meeting and was calling it a family conversation. My cousin, who'd repaid 7 months of my hospitality, with the one thing I hadn't protected against because I hadn't thought I needed to. My fiancé, now suggesting my work schedule was the real culprit. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. The same quiet, certain voice I use when I present findings to a board. "I'm going to walk out of here. The wedding is canceled. The condo goes on the market this week, and every person who blocked off a weekend in October to be there is going to know why. That's not a threat. It's just how information works." Natalie's expression shifted. My cousin straightened on the couch. My mother said, "My name." I walked out. Nobody followed. Nobody called after me. Nobody ran to the door to say they'd gotten it wrong. That told me what I needed to know. Monday morning I went to work and did what I'm trained to do. I canceled the venue, called the photographer, sent written notice to the caterer and the florist. I documented every refund and every non-refundable amount. Total loss, just over $9,000. That's painful. But it's the cost of information you needed to have before the wedding instead of after. Wednesday evening, I drafted the email. 212 people had received a save the date. I emailed every one of them. 2 paragraphs. Factual. The wedding was cancelled because my fiancée and I were no longer together. The reason we were no longer together was that she had been in a relationship with my cousin, who had been living in our home since November. For the past 7 months, no embellishments. No accusations beyond what I could document. The facts were damaging enough on their own. I scheduled it for Saturday morning at 8 a.m., set my phone to Do Not Disturb, and went to sleep. The responses came in predictable patterns. Support from the people who'd known me longest. Confusion from guests. Trying to figure out what to do about flights and hotel bookings. And a flood of damage control from my family, demanding I retract everything, calling it vindictive, calling it cruel. My cousin had been trying to rebuild his professional network in Toronto after the startup collapse. Techs. Sales is a relationship business in a city that's smaller than it looks. When the email reached people he'd been emailing about contract work and references and coffee meetings, the response wasn't what he needed. His pipeline dried up. The introductions stopped. By fall he was back to square one. My fiancée worked at a dental practice in Leslieville. The owners were connected to mutual friends who'd been at our engagement party. Within 2 weeks of the email circulating, Prax had heard enough that they quietly moved her to their secondary location in Scarborough. Longer commute, reduced hours. She resigned before the end of the year. I had a contact at our firm's Vancouver office. We weren't close, but the kind of professional relationship where you follow each other's career news and occasionally message on LinkedIn. The previous fall he'd mentioned that the business investigations team on the West Coast was looking for a senior manager. I'd turned it down without much deliberation because my fiancée didn't want to leave Toronto. Her family was here. Her friends were here. Her whole life was here. I called him on a Thursday morning. Is that position still open? There was a brief pause. We've actually elevated it to director level. Why are you asking? When do they need someone? Honestly, they needed someone in January. Are you seriously interested? I gave notice the following Monday. Packed what fit in a rented trailer. Drove through northern Ontario, across the prairies, through the Rockies, 4,000 kilometers. I listened to audiobooks the entire way because I didn't want to think. I just wanted to move forward in the most literal sense available to me. Vancouver is a different city. The mountains are right there every morning when you look north. The air smells different near the water. People seem to operate at a lower temperature than Toronto. Less urgent about everything, and that suited me exactly. I showed up to the office on a Monday in August. Kept my head down, did the work. Within 8 months I was leading a practice group. Within 14 months, I had a team of 11 people reporting to me, and a corner office. With a view I still find slightly unreal. Nobody in the building knew anything about my life east of the Rockies, and that anonymity felt like the first clean breath I'd taken since June. I met my partner at a colleague's birthday dinner the following spring. She worked as a veterinary technician at an animal hospital in East Vancouver. Calm. The kind of person who asks a real question and actually listens to the answer instead of waiting for her turn to talk. We stayed at the restaurant for 3 hours after everyone else had gone. She handed me her number as we were putting on our coats and leaving. On our third date she asked me why I'd moved to Vancouver. I could have given her the edited version. Instead I told her everything. The bedroom door, the family meeting, the email, the drive across 4 provinces. I watched her face while I talked, waiting for the pity or the discomfort, or the polite suggestion that it sounded complicated. None of it showed up. When I finished, she said, "They were lucky you kept it controlled, because most people in that situation wouldn't have." Then she asked if she could try my dessert. The family reached out at different intervals, over the months that followed. My sister first through a mutual friend I'd forgotten to block. Then my aunt, then distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all carrying variations of the same message. He's struggling. She's struggling. You've made your point. Isn't it time to let it go? My mother played the health card at the 14-month mark. My uncle texted from a number I didn't recognize. She'd had a cardiac episode, minor. She's stable, but she's asking for you. I sat with that for 3 days. Called my partner, talked it through until I got to the part that kept surfacing. My mother had known what was happening in that condo and said nothing. She'd arranged her living room like a courtroom and told me that blood was blood. She'd sat there while my fiancé suggested my work schedule was the underlying cause and hadn't said a word in my defense. I texted my uncle back, "Please tell her I hope her recovery goes smoothly. I'm not coming back." He replied, "She'll be devastated." I didn't respond. At the 19-month mark, an anonymous email arrived at my work address. Sent to me, my director, and 3 members of HR. A paragraph describing me as manipulative. Someone who had destroyed a family and fled the consequences. No specifics, no evidence. The kind of message designed to make people look at you a little differently when you walk into a meeting. I forwarded it to HR within an hour. Attached a timeline, the family meeting, the guest email, the cease and desist I'd eventually sent to my aunt, the documentation I'd maintained since June. Our IT team ran the IP trace. The message had originated from a coffee shop in Leslieville, the neighborhood where my former fiancée lived. They couldn't conclusively prove it was her. Public Wi-Fi, no login record. But the pattern was legible enough. Then something happened that I hadn't planned for and couldn't have engineered. Dar. She'd eventually found a position at a smaller dental practice closer to her neighborhood. A fresh start, as far as anyone could tell. What she apparently didn't account for was that the College of Dental Hygienists of Ontario logs every access to provincial insurance databases. Which patient files were queried, which credentials were used to make the query, when, and how many times. It's automatic. A compliance requirement that exists. Precisely because the information is sensitive. The practice owner ran a routine internal audit that spring and found a pattern of insurance database lookups tied to one specific patient file. A patient with no clinical appointments at their practice. A patient whose insurance records showed a current address in British Columbia. That patient was me. My partner's uncle happened to sit on the provincial college's conduct review committee. Not through any arrangement of mine, just through the kind of professional overlap that makes smaller industries what they are. At a dinner one evening, he mentioned a case without using names. A hygienist who'd been running repeated unauthorized lookups on a former personal contact through the provincial system. The audit trail was unambiguous. PIPDI violations, professional misconduct, unauthorized access to protected personal information. I nearly set down my fork. I asked him what name was on the file. He told me. I had a documentation folder on my laptop at home. Every contact attempt since I'd left Toronto, the IP trace report, the cease and desist, the report I'd filed with Vancouver police when the harassment had escalated. Time-stamped. Organized chronologically. When the college's investigator reached out the following month requesting background information, I had everything in a single folder ready to forward. The suspension notice was issued 3 weeks later. Full investigation pending. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired for a few days, and then I felt something closer to finished. My cousin called once, using a number I didn't recognize. I let him say what he'd come to say. He'd changed, he told me. He'd been in therapy, doing the work, trying to understand the damage he'd caused. He knew what he'd thrown away. Good, I said. A pause. Good? Good. That's how consequences are supposed to work. You make choices, you live with what follows, and hopefully you come out of it different. That part doesn't have anything to do with me anymore. He was quiet. I think he'd expected me to still be angry. Anger would have left some kind of opening, but I wasn't angry. I'd just moved on. My mother called 6 months ago. A real call, not through intermediaries. She sounded older than I remembered. She said she'd handled it wrong from the beginning, that she'd been trying to hold everyone together, and in doing so had failed the one person who'd actually deserved her support. I believe she meant it. I told her I appreciated her saying that. I told her I wasn't coming back to Toronto. Not for the family history, not for the geography. I had a life here, a real one. She asked about my partner. I told her we'd gotten married 4 months earlier. Small ceremony, her family, a handful of friends, a caterer we'd found through someone at work. Late afternoon on a Saturday in September, the mountains behind us. Everything exactly the right size. My mother was quiet for a moment. She said she wished she could have been there. Maybe another time, I said, and I left it at that. We ended the call gently. I don't know what comes next with her. Whether we find some version of a relationship, or whether this is simply where it ends. I'm not fully at peace with it. But I'm not at war with it either, and that's more than I could have said a year ago. My partner was in the kitchen when I came out after hanging up. She handed me a cup of tea without asking any questions, and leaned against the counter. With her shoulder touching mine, looking out at the mountains through the window. That's the thing nobody tells you about starting over. You don't get the version of your life you planned. You get the one you build after. The one constructed from the pieces that remain once you've cleared out everything that was held together by other people's expectations, and your own willingness to look the other way. I didn't know any of that when I was sitting in a parking garage in Toronto with my phone on silent and $11 worth of lavender macarons on the kitchen counter above me. But I know it now. And I've found that knowing it now is enough.